Good morning. Today we're going to be working on insects. No, we're going to be measuring insects. And what we're going to be doing is we're going to be making those measurements or taking those measurements and then making a line plot. So in class, I would have had you measure all of these, but what we're going to do is we're going to measure them together. And hopefully this is just a nice reminder of something we've already worked on in class. Now, I had a tough time finding a ruler that was like the one we used in class, but I think this one will work. Now, when you look at this first one here, okay, it's kind of hard to see. It's a little blurry. But if you notice, we have 0 here, down at the bottom, and we have 1 here, and then we have a ton of tiny little marks. And so I want to show you which ones we're going to be looking at. All right? The ones we used in class were the ones that had this right here as our smallest one. They had that one as our smallest one because if we count how many lines there are using this one as our smallest, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and then you count this one as 8, that means those little ones are eighths. So each one of these would be 1/8. All right, so when I'm measuring the green lace wig, I would look at it and I would see that it would be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 of those dots to bring me to this section right here. All right, and so 5 of those, if each one of them is 1/8, the green lace wig then would be 5/8 inches. So we would write 5/8 inches. Okay, now for those of you at home, we are on page 264. So if you need to pause this video so you can get your books out, that would be great. But let's go ahead and look at the boreal firefly. Now remember, we're only using these ones as our smallest. Okay, so, excuse me, I messed up. These ones as our smallest. Okay, so those are going to be our eighths. So when we count by those, 1, 2, 3, that means that would be 3/8. 3/8 inches. So the boreal firefly is 3/8 inches. Let's go to the paper wasp. Why don't you try this one on your own? I will tell you that these are our eighths again. So why don't you pause this video real quick, try to see how many eighths this wasp is, and then write that down. All right, let's check your answer. So the first dot is 1/8. Then we have 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8. The paper wasp would be 5/8 inches. Let's do one more together. The Carolina mantid. All right. Now, if you notice, this one is over 1 inch. Here's 1 inch. So now each line here, we're going to be using these ones as our smallest ones. Those ones are going to be 1/8. So the first dot would be 1 and 1/8. So we would write that as 1 and 1/8. So you figure out how far that line goes to. Why don't you pause the video real quick and see if you can figure out how far that one goes to. All right, when you counted, hopefully you got 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8. We would write that as 1 and 6/8. Now, many of you may see that we could also write these as 3/4, right? You could write 1 and 3/4. And that would be the same as 1 and 6/8. But we're not going to be doing that in this video. We're just going to leave them as eighths. All right, so we've measured the other ones. The American cockroach is 1 and 4/8 inches. The yellow bumblebee, 6/8. The green June bug is 6/8 inches. And the red-legged grasshopper is 1 inch. All right, let's go on to our next page where we have a few more bugs. Let's just try 2 of these. Let's look at the ground beetle. The ground beetle. All right, again, these are our eighths right here where I put my dot. So why don't you pause the video, measure the ground beetle, and write that in on your paper. Let's check and see how you did. Hopefully, when you were counting 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8. Hopefully you got 7/8 for the ground beetle, 7/8 inches. All right, and let's do one more down here. All right. When you look at the short-tailed dusk darter dragonfly, we already know that it is 1 6/8, but let's just show you how. Okay, here is the 1, and then each little dot here is going to be an eighth. So we have 1/8, 2/8, 3/8, 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, and that is where we get those 6/8. Now, if you notice, there are smaller ones, smaller measurements that I do want to talk about just for the sake of you being aware of it. But let's look at the ones in between 1 and 2. All right, I'm going to count how many little tiny ones there are. So here we go. My pen might not be small enough, but we'll try. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, and then this would be 16. So those tiny little marks are 16ths. If you think about it, if we were working with eighths and we did half as small, well, if you do half of an eighth, you get a 16th. All right, now, if you look at these ones in between 0 and 1, my pen is not skinny enough to do this. But if these ones right here, the middle ones, were 16ths, what do you think is half of a 16th? Well, if you said a 32nd, 1/32, you are correct. And some people have actually measured to those. I have seen some measurements where, it'll say like 1 7/32. Okay, because we want to be super precise. So the more, or the smaller the measurement you get, the more precise you are. So we are going to now focus our attention on using this data to make a line plot. So up on the left, I have my the information. I copied it all over there into a nice, neat chart. You would have done that in class, so you're welcome. But now we're going to, at the bottom of this next page on 266, we're going to fill out a line plot. So when you think about it, what would be a good title for this graph? It has to include what we're talking about. If you wrote or thought of insect length, that's probably a good title. All right, doesn't need to be anything more than that. But I think you do need to include the fact that we are talking about insects and we are talking about their length. So you can't just have one or the other. You'd have to have both. Now, let's take a look down at the bottom for the label. It might be easier if we put in some numbers first. So let's save this part for a second. Okay, we'll fill that in just a minute. But let's find the smallest number up here. So pause the video, find the smallest number you can find. All right, hopefully you found 3/8. Now 3/8 was on there a few times, but we're still going to make 3/8 as our smallest. Now, if you notice up here at the title where it says length to the nearest 1/8 inch, that means we're going to count by 1/8. So 3/8, next one would be 4/8, 5/8, 6/8, 7/8, 8/8. What should I put in place of 8/8? Well, if you said 1 whole, you're correct. Okay, so now we can continue. We were at 8/8, but we changed it to 1, so we start over. Just like when we go from 9 to 10, and then we start counting over, it's like 10 and 1, 10 and 2, to make those 12 and 11 and 13. All right, so we have 1 and we go 1 and 1/8, 1 and 2/8, 1 and 3/8, 1 and 4/8, 1 and 5/8, and then 1 and 6/8. I have to count by eighths even if I don't have that measurement up here on the table on the left. Okay? Now, what were the numbers down at the bottom? What were they talking about? Well, that was talking about how long the insect was. So what we're going to write is we're going to write down here, we're going to write length in inches. Length in inches. So now what we're going to do is we're going to go back up to our chart, and we're just going to cross these off one at a time and put these on our chart. So it's on our graph. It's going to look like this. So if I cross off 1 and 6/8, I come down here on my graph and put an X on 1 and 6/8. So why don't you pause this video, and then when you get done, we'll go through and see if you guys got the right answers. All right, so next one was 3/8, then 6/8, 1 and 2/8, 7/8, 5/8, another 3/8, so that goes on top, another 1 and 6/8, so that goes up there. And we have a 1 and 4/8, 6/8, 5/8, 7/8, another 3/8, and then a 1 and 6/8. So what I like to do is I like to go back and I like to count my X's to make sure that I did not forget any insects. So let's count these. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Now if I go back up to the top and I count these as well, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. So good. I have all my X's. So now what we're going to do is we're going to look at just a few of the questions on that next page on 267 on how to answer these. Let's take a look at numbers 2 and 3. Let's start with number 2. How many insects are 1 and 6/8 inches long? I want you to pause the video, look back at your chart or your line plot on 266 and see if you can answer that. All right, when you look back here, we were looking for 1 and 6/8, which was over here. We count 1, 2, 3. There were 3 insects. So I'd go back to my answer key over here and I would write 3. Next, it says how many insects are 7/8 inches long? So I look back at my chart. How many of them were 7/8? I count 1, 2. So the answer would be 2. 2 insects. And now it says, what is the difference between these two measurements? 2 measurements. So what were the measurements? We had 1 and 6/8 inches and we had 7/8 of an inch. So I'm going to find the difference of those. What does difference mean? I need to subtract. So 1 and 6/8 minus 7/8. Let's do this together. 6/8 minus 7/8. You can't do that. So you need to regroup that. 1 becomes a 0. And we're going to regroup. So 8/8 plus 6/8 gives us 14/8. So 14/8 minus 7/8. Well, 14 minus 7 is 7. So you get 7/8. So the difference between these two measurements is 7/8 inches. All right, why don't you pause the video, try number 3, and then we'll go over these answers together. All right, let's look at 3A. It says how many of the insects are longer than 7/8 and shorter than 1 and 6/8. So it says longer than 7/8 and shorter than 1 and 6/8. So when you go over here, Here's 7/8. So these ones don't count. It has to be longer than that. And then here's 1 6/8, and it has to be shorter than that. So those don't count. So when I look, there's only 3 left. All right? So if I look right here, these 3, those would be the 3 insects that we would count. So if I go back to my answer page, you should have gotten 3. Now it says, what is their combined length? So if you look, I have 1 right here, 1 2/8, and 1 4/8. So 1 2/8, and 1 4/8. And it says, what is their combined length? Well, what I need to do is I need to add those. So I had 1 2/8, and 1 4/8. So hopefully when you were adding these, you added the 2/8 and the 4/8 and got 6/8. And then you added the 3 1s and got 3. So your answer here should have been 3 6/8. All right, go ahead and find the IXL for today. If you have any questions, please make sure you contact me. You need to get to 80%. Good luck.